The morning sun crept through Oma's curtains, but the warmth that usually greeted her was absent. She sat up in bed with vacant eyes, her gaze fixed on nothing, as if her soul had not risen with her. Her lips moved slowly, releasing a whispery hum that carried no meaning, just fragmented syllables floating in the air. Her body trembled slightly, and her breathing was uneven, shallow, almost hesitant. She moved like a stranger in her own room, trailing her fingers along the wall, pausing every few seconds to stare at invisible shapes. Her eyes were wild, shifting with confusion, then fear. Suddenly she let out a scream, backing away from her mirror like it had shown her something inhuman. Moments later she began to laugh, sharp, loud, and unhinged. The laughter broke into a sob, and then silence. Oma wandered to the window and pointed at nothing, murmuring to herself, shaking her head repeatedly. She crouched beside the bed and began talking to shadows. She didn't recognize her room, her belongings, not even herself. Ola entered the room shortly after, her face calm, steps measured. She watched from the doorway wearing the mask of concern, but beneath that mask, satisfaction bloomed. The ritual had worked, quicker than expected. She observed Oma's erratic movements, the terror in her eyes, the way she recoiled from invisible figures. Ola remained still, hiding her glee under a perfectly controlled expression. Inside her, a dark victory surged. Oma's mind was unraveling like thread pulled loose, and no one, except Ola, knew just how deep the damage already ran. Within just a few days, Oma's condition spiraled into chaos. What began as murmurs and fear in her eyes transformed into full-blown madness. Her once elegant room turned into a battlefield, clothes ripped apart and strewn across the floor, luxury handbags slashed open with scissors, paintings and framed awards that once symbolized her success now hung torn, their shards of glass littering the ground. She wandered barefoot, even outside the gate, muttering to herself and swatting at the air like she was fighting something unseen. The neighbors began to talk. Whispers fluttered through the compound like dry leaves on wind. It's spiritual, some said. Others believed she had gone mad from stress or a hidden heartbreak. Her staff walked on eggshells, eyes wide, afraid of her unpredictable outbursts. Some began quitting quietly, unable to handle the growing horror within the house. Ola, on the surface, was the picture of concern. She stood by her side, offering tissues, wiping fake tears, and feeding her medications she knew would do nothing. But behind closed doors, she was a storm of destruction. She crept into Oma's office, quietly burning confidential documents and fashion contracts. She accessed her laptop, deleting vital business files, client contacts, and financial data. Every night, as Oma sobbed and wailed from her bedroom, Ola sat calmly at the dining table with her phone, watching it all crumble. Her face never showed joy, but deep within her, satisfaction coiled like a serpent. What Oma had built with grace and kindness, Ola was now tearing down piece by piece, and no one suspected a thing. Oma was taken from one hospital to another, her parents desperately hoping for answers, any diagnosis that could explain the madness consuming their daughter. But each test returned clean. Her brain scans were normal, her blood work flawless. No infections, no trauma, nothing medically wrong. And yet, Oma screamed at walls, spoke to spirits, and recoiled from mirrors as if haunted. Her parents sat in waiting rooms with red eyes and trembling hands, watching as their once brilliant daughter unraveled before them. The girl who had built an empire with poise and grace was now reduced to silence one moment and fits of rage the next. Nurses whispered. Some refused to go near her after she shrieked a prophecy in a voice not her own. The more the doctors shook their heads, the more her parents' hope faded. That was when they began to murmur the unthinkable. What if it wasn't physical? What if something darker had taken hold of Oma? Ola, always close by, carefully planted her seeds. With a cautious tone and just enough concern, she suggested they try a native healer she heard was powerful. Her voice carried just enough humility to hide her intentions. They listened, torn between science and desperation, unaware that the real architect of their daughter's downfall was standing right there, masking malevolence with sympathy. Every suggestion Ola made, every gesture of care, was part of the game. And now she was steering the blame far away from herself, just where she needed it to be. In the quiet hours of dawn, when hope was nearly extinguished, Omar's mother made a final call. She reached out to Pastor Dyke, a longtime family friend, known not just for his sermons, but for his unflinching battles in spiritual warfare. He arrived the next morning, dressed in simple white, his Bible in one hand and anointing oil in the other. The moment he stepped through the gate, a strange chill swept across the compound. As he entered Omar's room, he paused. The atmosphere was thick, oppressive. It was more than madness. There was something else in that space, something watching, something clinging. He began to pray, pacing the floor with bold declarations. Omar, who had been limp for hours, suddenly sat up and let out a guttural laugh that sent shivers down every spine in the room. Her eyes rolled back. Her voice, layered and otherworldly, mocked him. Pastor John didn't flinch. He anointed every corner of the room, calling out whatever had taken root. After 2 hours of warfare prayer, he turned to her parents with firm instruction. They must begin a 7-day deliverance fast. No distractions, no compromises. Everyone in the house must participate. The moment this fast was declared, something shifted. Ola, who had quietly begun packing her things under the pretense of needing space, suddenly fell ill. Her chest tightened. Her legs felt like lead. She tried to leave, but her body refused. It was as if an invisible force gripped her at the door. Panic began to rise within her. She realized too late. Pastor John's prayers had not only reached Omar, they had started hunting the source. And now, the darkness Ola had partnered with was turning against her. She was trapped. The exposure had begun. By the 3rd day of the deliverance fast, the house felt like a battlefield, cloaked in silence. Candles burned low in every corner, worship songs echoed softly from the parlor, and the air was thick with incense and intercession. Pastor John had barely stepped into Omar's room when it began. She thrashed violently on the bed, her limbs contorting in unnatural angles. Her eyes, once empty and distant, now burned with something unholy. Her voice deepened, then cracked into a piercing wail that echoed through the compound. Then came the words, sharp, accusing, and chilling. She screamed Ola's name, again and again. Everyone froze. The staff gathered in the hallway. Omar's mother dropped her rosary. Pastor John narrowed his eyes and stepped closer, Bible held high. With unshaken authority, he commanded the spirit to speak. A moment of stillness followed, then laughter, low and guttural, rolling from Omar's lips like thunder. The voice that answered was not her own. It spoke of betrayal, of Mama UC, of a pact sealed with hatred and jealousy. The demon laughed, boasting of how easily it was welcomed in. She opened the door. It hissed, "Your beloved Ola." She begged for her to fall. Down the corridor, hidden in the shadows, Ola listened in horror. Her knees buckled. A burning sensation surged through her chest. She clutched her stomach and screamed as invisible forces slammed her to the ground. The spirit had begun to turn on her. The power she once thought she controlled was now exposing her, dragging her into the very torment she had wished for Omar. Her cover was gone. The House of Secrets had collapsed, and the spirits she summoned had started collecting their debt. It began with a shriek so loud it startled dogs from their sleep. Ola bolted into the street at dawn, barefoot and half-naked, her wrapper dragging behind her like a fallen crown.
Her braided cornrows were now tangled, unwild, and her hands clawed at her scalp as she ran, yanking strands of hair out by the roots. She screamed words that made no sense, babbling and weeping, then laughing as though she were possessed by 1,000 voices. Down the road, people gathered, drawn by the sound of chaos. Children clung to their mothers as Ola stumbled into the market square, her face soaked in sweat and spit, her eyes wide and hollow. She fell to her knees near a fruit stall, foam gathering at the corners of her mouth. "She took what was mine," she shouted, voice breaking, veins bulging at her neck. "Omar, she stole my light. I was supposed to shine." Vendors dropped their baskets. Some made the sign of the cross. Others muttered prayers. No one dared go near her. By evening, Word spread like wildfire. Mama Yusi's hut, the feared shrine in the Makoko swamp, had burnt ash. Nothing remained but charred wood, broken bones, and a thick black mark in the earth. The villagers whispered in fear. Something evil had ended, but not without taking something in return. And Ola, she was now a shadow of herself, cursed by the very darkness she had begged to unleash. On the 7th day, just before the final session of prayer was to begin, Oma collapsed. Her body went limp mid-chant, and her head slumped backward as if every breath had been snatched from her lungs. Her mother screamed, rushing to her side, but Pastor John raised his hand calmly and continued praying, his voice now a whisper filled with fire. The room fell still. For nearly an hour, Oma lay motionless, her chest barely rising. Then, just as suddenly, her fingers twitched. Her eyes fluttered open, this time calm, aware, and deeply human. No growls, no screams, just clarity. She blinked, taking in the sight of her mother sobbing on the floor, her father clinging to a Bible with trembling hands. Pastor John stepped forward, his eyes misty but resolute. The weight that had wrapped itself around the room lifted, like fog melting under sunlight. Oma sat up slowly, confused by the overwhelming emotion surrounding her. She asked where she was, what had happened, why everyone was crying. Her voice was soft, almost childlike. She remembered nothing, none of the screaming, none of the shadows, none of the name she once howled with fury. Pastor John knelt beside her and gently explained. She had been caged in a spiritual prison, her life nearly exchanged through a deadly covenant, but grace intervened. He told her that God had stepped in where man could not, and that not everyone who smiles at you carries peace in their heart. She had survived barely, but not unchanged. News of what had happened to Oma and what Ola had done spread like wildfire across the city. In churches, salons, and social media threads, the story ignited shock and fear. Ola, now a hollow shadow of her former self, was quietly transferred to a church-run mental facility on the outskirts of town, far from the world she once envied. There, she spent her days screaming into silence, lost in a mind that had betrayed her just as she had betrayed her friend. Oma's recovery became a testimony raw, powerful, and unforgettable. Her parents shared it during a Sunday service, standing with Pastor Dyke before a packed congregation. Gasps filled the room as the layers of betrayal were peeled back. The same people who once whispered that she was cursed now wept in silence, stunned by the truth. Former staff returned with heads bowed. Neighbors brought gifts and letters of apology. Some couldn't meet her eyes. Others fell to their knees asking for forgiveness. Oma received them all with grace, but her silence spoke volumes. She had endured pain not even her enemies could have imagined. And now, her story had become a warning proof that evil can wear the face of friendship. In the months that followed, Oma began the slow, deliberate process of rebuilding her life. Her business, once teetering on the edge of collapse, was restored brick by spiritual brick. But this time, Oma wasn't just chasing success. She was anchored in prayer, fasting, and wisdom. No one entered her space without spiritual discernment. Her staff was smaller, but fiercely loyal. Every design, every stitch, carried new meaning: survival, strength, and sanctity. But Oma's healing didn't stop with her business. She launched a foundation dedicated to women who had suffered betrayal from friends, family, or lovers. The initiative also funded mental health programs for women recovering from emotional trauma and spiritual oppression. Her story, once whispered in shame, was now a loudspeaker of hope. And then, one quiet afternoon, she visited the church-run facility where Ola remained a fragile, haunted version of the girl she once knew. Oma stood at a distance, watching through the glass as Ola rocked slowly in a chair, whispering to herself. No anger stirred within her, only peace. She closed her eyes, whispered a prayer, and forgave her not because she had to, but because carrying the weight of hate would only anchor her soul. She chose freedom. Not every smile is sincere, and not every friend is sent from heaven. Oma's story is a haunting reminder that kindness, while noble, must be guarded by wisdom. She gave without limits, loved without suspicion, and nearly lost everything to someone she called a sister. Envy, silent and venomous, crept into her home wrapped in gratitude and left her mind shattered. But in the end, truth lit the darkest corners, and what was hidden was dragged into the open. Healing came not just through medicine, but through prayer, confession, and spiritual warfare. It was not easy and it was not instant, but it was real. For every listener, the lesson is clear. Love freely, but watch closely. Protect your space. Test every spirit, because not every open door brings peace. Sometimes, it invites your own destruction. Be careful who you open your doors to. Some are not guests. They're thieves in disguise. Thank you for watching this powerful story. If it touched your heart or opened your eyes, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. We bring you true life-inspired tales that teach, heal, and transform.